The next thing we're going to jump into is the new UI system. And the first thing that we're going to do is to click the 2D mode. So in Unity 4.3 we introduced some 2D features, and they're also useful for the GUI. So in the scene view there is a little box here called 2D. So if you enable that, you'll see that the scene view switches to a completely flat representation, and that the gizmo in the upper right disappears. It looks like this. What we're going to do is to create a canvas. So the way that the new UI system works is that everything is based off of a canvas. So if you go to Game Object, you can go to UI and create a canvas. Game Object, UI, Canvas from the top menu. And we will rename this object from Canvas to HUD, H-U-D, capitalized, Canvas, HUD Canvas. Just to give you a little bit of background information, the UI system is based around the concept of a rect transform. So rect, short for rectangle, has a number of ways of displaying a rectangle on the screen, and every child object, every UI element is based off of the parent object's rect transform. So in the case of a canvas, you will see that in a particular mode, such as screen space overlay, the rect transform's values are being driven by the game view. So the first thing I'm going to do is to select my HUD canvas in the hierarchy, and I'm going to frame selected. So if you hover over the scene view and press F, you will see an outline of this canvas. So that's driven by the game view. You can see if I drag the game view, the actual shape of that is changing. So that HUD canvas is going to have all of our child elements attached to it, and it's going to stay to the scale of the screen. So if you're working for different resolutions, it's going to still stay full screen. So it's driven by this canvas component. Canvas has 3 modes: screen space overlay, which is just filling the entire screen; screen space camera, which can have UI perspective; and world space, which is for things that are intrinsically within the 3D scene. So for example, you might have a speech bubble popping up from a 3D character. We're going to stick with screen space overlay, so we don't need to worry about that. Pixel perfect can be used to make sure that all of your graphic elements are pixel perfect, but we don't need it for what we're doing here. And graphic raycaster, we don't need to concern ourselves with at all. What we do want to do is to add a component before we do anything else, which is a canvas group. So what a canvas group does is allows UI elements to have an alpha, and it allows you to toggle whether they're interactable. So for our entire UI, we don't actually want interaction. So we don't want to put in buttons or anything like that. We're going to be putting in elements that would be interactable, but we can cancel them out by, on the canvas group, removing that. Also, because we use a raycast from screen space to the quad in order to control the character, we don't want this canvas, which is going to be effectively rendered in front of everything, to block that raycast. So on your canvas group, interactable and block raycast should be unchecked.
Real quick too is, obviously the canvas is very big, and just want to clarify real quick, it's so big because it maps 1 pixel per unit, world unit, so that we get the highest level of fidelity in our graphics. So if you have a graphic that is 512 pixels by 512 pixels, it's going to be drawn 512 units by 512 units. And if you recall, the capsule collider on our character is like 0.6 units wide, so 512 units is very, very big.
So that's why you're seeing the canvas display huge in here, and then the level looking tiny down in the corner. There's nothing to worry about whatsoever. One trick that I don't want you guys to do right now, because it can lead to confusion, is that you can use layers to disable this. So all new UI elements are automatically put on the UI layer, and what you can do is just choose nothing and then UI to only show the UI. But we don't want to do that. We're just going to work with it out as it is like that. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is actually get a HUD element into this. So we're going to create an empty child. There's another way of doing this. So I want to basically give you an example of each way of doing certain things. We can select HUD canvas, and from the top we can go Game Object and add things. We can go to the Create menu here, which now has Create Empty and Empty Child as of 4.6. But we can also right-click on a game object we want to create an empty child for. So I'm going to right-click and go to Create Empty Child, and I'm going to rename this game object Health UI. capital H, capital UI. Now, the advantage of adding a child directly to this rather than making it separately and adding it is that because we selected that HUD canvas first, Unity knows that we're trying to add another UI element. So instead of the standard transform component that it adds to any new game object, it's adding a rect transform. And you can see that you have a slightly different looking component than you're used to. Just to draw your attention to something else to do with UI. So this is our new empty game object, this square in the middle. We also have up at the top a brand new tool, the fifth one there, which is our rect tool. And you can use that to scale things, you can use it to rotate. And you'll also notice that when you drag these things around, we have snapping, and we have these mysterious looking triangles in the center. Those are our anchor points, and they're a very powerful way to position your different UI elements. And we're going to show off how you use some of those throughout the day. The first thing we want to do is to set up our health UI in the lower left of the screen. There's a button which may not immediately appear to be a button on the rect transform. And it's called the Anchor Presets button. And what it does is give you all of these different presets and a couple of different modes using Alt and Shift in order to be able to lay things out. So the rect transform's position is based off a number of different factors. And when you're in different modes and have your position in different places, the actual properties that you're getting, the position, X, Y, Z, the width and height, will be different depending on how things are anchored, i.e. where those particular anchors are positioned. So when they're all positioned together, so for example, if I just move this and move my anchor to the top right, then my position is relative to where those anchors are. So as I drag my canvas in, you can see that that stays with the right-hand edge. So it's all based around this thing, but we're going to use some of the presets for this to make it a little simpler. So what I want you to do is to, with the rect transform button open, hopefully you can see this menu, we're going to, first off we're going to hold Alt, because Alt is also going to set the position whilst moving the anchors for us, and we're also going to hold Shift. And then we're going to click on the lower left preset. So you can see they've got titles here. We've got bottom and left. We're going to click there with Alt and Shift. So you see if I hold Alt, it moves the box. If I hold Shift, it highlights a blue circle, which is our pivot. And we click there.
If you have trouble remembering that, it also says it right at the top.
Yeah, we've got also
Shift
set pivot.
sets the pivot, Alt sets the position.
Then what you should see is that in your scene view that you have something in the lower left. It looks like this. Then I'm going to go ahead and set the width to 75, and I'm going to set the height to 60. So the next thing I'm going to do is to add those child elements, this heart icon and the slider. So I'm going to, again, want to add something directly as a child. So I'm going to right-click Health UI this time, go to UI, and choose Image. So UI image is exactly what it sounds like. It's any way to get a texture or sprite, as we call it in imported form, into your UI layout. So once we've added this, rename it from image to heart. Then in the rect transform, we are going to set the X and Y positions, if they're not already, to 0. And I'm going to set my width and height to 30. So what you should see is a white square in the lower left of your screen. So you should have your Health UI parent object, and you should have your heart, which is a white square right now. So when you add an image in the new system, until you give it a source image, it has a white background. So it falls back to using its color property. So that's just a really handy way to see where the outline of the thing's going to be. And if you didn't want to see it at all, you could always turn down the alpha value, the opacity of the image. But we do have an image for it. So we're going to, on the image component, use the circle select to look into our assets and choose heart. So click the circle select to the right of source image and choose heart from the assets.
I'm sure you've all are noticing that the heart and the white box and everything are actually appearing in the lower left-hand corner in your game view. So it's very easy to set things up because you'll see what it will actually look like in the final project.
The next thing we're going to do is to add in a slider for our UI. So we have the heart, and next to it we want to have the amount of health displayed to the user. So I'm going to reselect my health UI because I want to create a child of that. So I'm going to right-click, do the same again, UI, and this time we're going to choose slider. And we're going to rename this, first of all, to Health Slider. So F2 on PC, Return on Mac, Health Slider, capital H and S. Then I'm going to set the X position in the rect transform to 95, ensuring that Y and Z are 0. So what this is effectively is a slider. So you can use this for a number of different things. If you have settings in a game, you might want people to drag a slider and set something. We're using it slightly differently. We're using it in a non-interactable manner. And basically, we don't need to worry about the handle. So what I want you guys to do is to open up Health Slider to see the child objects that are standard within a slider. You'll see that we have fill area and handle slide area. So the fill area is in charge of the background and the fill itself. So the main space that you've got to fill and what's going to be behind it. We don't want the handle slide area at all, so we're going to remove that from the hierarchy. So leaving the fill area, select handle slide area, and to delete something, if you're on a PC, delete key. On Mac, Command backspace will remove it from the hierarchy. And you should then lose the handle in the game view and scene view, just be left with the actual slider space itself. So we want to set up what this actually does. The first thing we're going to do is look at our slider component. So the slider component is basically all of the different rules about what it's going to do. It has an interactable checkbox. We know that we don't want to actually have any interaction here, but because we place this under the canvas, which itself isn't interactable, we don't need to worry about the sub-assets having interactable checkboxes. So we don't need to go through and uncheck all of those. The canvas, being the parent, is handling all of that for us. Because it is something that you can interact with as standard, we have a transition. So we don't want any of that either. So we're going to select transition, none. Then we want the max value of this to be equal to the starting health effectively. So I'm going to set the max value to 100. Then I'm going to change the value also to 100. So if you look at the game view, when I adjust this slider, you can see that that is the value that we're getting. So when I set that to 100, I know that I can write some scripting that addresses this slider and decreases that each time we get hurt by an enemy. Then what we're going to do is to have some kind of visual feedback when you do actually get hurt. Because that slider in the lower left is kind of small, we want to have the screen kind of flash like it would in a real game every time you get hurt. So we can do that using a UI image as well. So what we're going to do is to go back to our health UI. So reselect Health UI, right-click. This time we're going to add another UI image. We're going to rename this Damage Image. And because it's a brand new image that's just kind of sat in the lower left right now, we want this to be over the entire screen. So the entire screen can kind of flash red each time you get hurt. So there's a very quick way with the anchor presets yet again to stretch this over the entire screen. So here's what I want you guys to do, is to select Damage Image, drag it up, and drop it onto HUD Canvas, which will make it a child of HUD Canvas instead. Then we can collapse Health UI. So once you have made it a child of HUD Canvas, you can then go ahead, select, and then Alt-click on the lower right anchor preset, as I'm showing you right now. Alt-click there, and you should have then white covering your entire canvas. And then the final thing we need to do is set the alpha to 0 for this. So we're going to worry about the color in our scripting later, so don't worry about that now. But to set the alpha to 0, we just click the color block and then drag the A for alpha down to 0. Obviously, if you have done that, please do save your scene. Very important.